the myth of masculine primacy, especially in spirituality and spiritual teachings, and will go so far as to say religion as well. So I want to invite you into this re-remembering of like, what if the feminine is not secondary? What if the feminine is not made from the man, as many of us were taught in our religious upbringing? But what if the feminine is the original? Like, we have been taught in so many organized religions that like we as human beings are made in the likeness of the creator. And it's something that I heard like a lot growing up, and the like whole, the woman is made of the man's rib in the Catholic Church. But like when we actually look at that, sit with that, feel into that, experience that, like the the man comes from the woman. The all comes from the womb. The womb is the closest thing to the creator, to the creatrix, to the truth of like that which is more than, above than, beyond our matter-based dimension, is portaled into our matter-based dimension through the womb portal. Get to know the modern day mystics, the seers, the seekers, the oracles, the witchy women with one foot in divinity and the other deeply rooted in their humanity. Together we traverse the practical and the energetic. We will excavate the long buried, activate the once dormant, and we never skip the integration. The feminine revolution has risen, and she's calling you by name. Join me, your host, professional priestess Lindsay Schroeder, as we adventure, anoint, alchemize, and experience our deepest desires. This is more than an awakening. It's a remembrance. It's more than a conversation. It's a ceremony. I had a session the other day, and while I was like deep in the liminal space, in that connected space, in that expanded consciousness space, I connected deeply to both Mother Earth as well as Mother God. And I came out of the session with a ton of different downloads and aspects of wisdom and pieces of guidance. But the piece that the priestess who was co-creating with me was most curious to hear about was this gift from the totality of the mother as a whole. And when I was finally able to share this with her, it was a week later, because we had to finish up our session. My little one actually like came into the session, and I had to like finish up. So I like left the session live, let her like leave her little downloads, and her and I like texted back and forth. But it wasn't until about a week later when we actually got to connect, where we could see each other again with a couple of other of my like spiritual soul fam, co-creators. And I got to share this piece of wisdom, this like massive download, this thing that when it was happening, she could tell how important, how potent, how like massive it was. And when I finally got to share it with her and with these other individuals, I couldn't like help but do anything but giggle because of how funny it was, and yet how human the way this was shared and was given to me. And I don't know about those of you who also get downloads, who see synchronicities and symbols and have this like conversation going with the universe, but it's always one of my favorites when the way that the conversation comes through is like almost in meme form. And like I'm so grateful to this type of connection and this type of language. One of the things that I always like to share when I talk about gifts and conversation with the universe or with source or with your guides is that like I set the parameter and set the intention that I really like my guides and my messages and like my conversations to be like those old V8 commercials like, should have had a V8 thunk in the head, that, like, I want it to smack me in the face. Like, I want it to be so clear. I want it to be so bioavailable. I want it to be so digestible. I want it to be so understandable. Like, I want my messages to, like, really stand out and be there for me so that I can, like, understand and that I don't miss them and that they're, like, truly right there. And so when I finally was able to share this, I was, like, straight up giggling, and I said to them, I was like, "No one has ever included the rooster in the conversation, in the debate of what came first, the chicken or the egg." They're like, "We don't talk about the rooster is never included in this conversation." And, like, this was a culmination of feminine teachings in a way that was, like, so human and so funny and yet so potent. And I have been with it for weeks, multiple weeks at this point, and, like, it distilled and what one of my, like, most important clients described as tetracene, that, like, I help her to Tetris, that, like, the piece is up top, and then when it drops down and, like, cleans that line out, Tetris, or when the piece drops down and then it, like, fits into a line, tetracene. Like, as this has started to Tetris and drop in and, like, create its unfolding, those ripple effects, I have just, like, seen so many and come to clarity on so many of the wisdoms and the teachings and the embodiments and the truths that, like, are so evident, that are so, like, such capital T truths, and yet our world looks right through them and looks past them. And, like, this meme of, like, no one has ever included the rooster in the conversation of the chicken or the egg, it really does bring me to so many different points. And I'm going to try to be succinct in this because there's so many different things that I want to talk about here. But, like, the myth of masculine primacy, especially in spirituality and spiritual teachings, and will go so far as to say religion as well. So I want to invite you into this remembering of, like, what if the feminine is not secondary? What if the feminine is not made from the man, as many of us were taught in our religious upbringing? But what if the feminine is the original? Like, we have been taught in so many organized religions that, like, we as human beings are made in the likeness of the creator. And it's something that I heard, like, a lot growing up, and the, like, whole the woman is made of the man's rib in the Catholic Church. But, like, when we actually look at that, sit with that, feel into that, experience that, like, the the man comes from the woman. The all comes from the womb. The womb is the closest thing to the creator, to the creatrix, to the truth of, like, that which is more than, above than, beyond our matter-based dimension, is portaled into our matter-based dimension through the womb portal. So, made in the likeness of the creator, the creatrix, we're talking about the womb. And so when I got this message and I got this download of, like, the rooster has never been included in that conversation, the rooster is not included in that conversation. It is it is the chicken and the egg that we discuss, and it, like, seeing it truly in this, like, almost comic book format in this session, in this download, in this space, truly, like, dropped in so many pieces and things, and so many things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to use this as the kind of, like, branching off point, the root system, and, like, follow so many of these branches and leaves and fruits and flowers and discuss so much of what the priestess path is and means to me, as well as in a broader sense, what the priestess path and so much of our world and how we move forward and how we grow and how we alchemize and just a different perspective than what a lot of us were taught and were told and were shown and what was displayed, especially if you grew up in one of these religions where the man, the masculine, the male face of God is either the primary or the only that was discussed and was portrayed and was expressed. And so, like, growing up inside Catholicism and in the Catholic Church, I was forcefully sent to Catholic school until 8th grade. There were a lot of rules and a lot of those spoken and unspoken. There was a lot of hierarchy. There was a lot of shame. And like my earliest memories and understandings of God is this masculine God as a judge, as a watcher, and as a punisher. And so, like, I was constantly looking for, like, where did the feminine go? Like, why wasn't her image reflected back to me? I never understood why the priests were all men and like we had nuns that were women, but that like that hierarchy, that holiest of holies, that individual, that representation, that mouthpiece for God, for the teachings, for the way, is always coming from a masculine tongue. And like these early moments of feeling erased and unwelcome for so many reasons, or like wrong in my feminine body, and having that be such a part of like growing up and growing into myself that was in such opposition to church and to this connection to a higher power and what was described through the church as like this is the most important relationship, is like your relationship with God. And so like there were just so many pieces that felt like they didn't fit, and it wasn't like I didn't receive, I didn't experience, and I didn't align with so much of what I was told was this godly experience. Like I went through these rites, I went through these things that you were required to do. For instance, like I was baptized, obviously without my consent as a child. I was sent through my first communion. I went through reconciliation, which for those of you who are not familiar with the Catholic Church is about the telling of your sins to the priest, who is an old man. And most of the time when I was confessing sins, the majority of those sins were about masturbation. like, and I'm sitting here in front of an old man telling him all of these things that I've done wrong, all of these like bad girl things, like, oh, I wasn't a good girl here. And then this man is telling me, like, here's how you erase that. Here's how you heal that. Here's how you solve that. Here's how you get forgiveness from that. And I'm being told what my penance is. And I'm going back to the pew and giggling with my friends and like saying my prayers to like get out of jail, or having a conversation with the teacher about how long that took, because like I took it seriously for a while where I was like, okay, I'm gonna like write down every single thing and like share that. And like there are just so many pieces growing up in an organized religion, growing up being told, verbally told what God was, and especially the masculine face of God, that like didn't fit my natural expression and didn't fit my natural rhythm, and was always kind of like letting me down, or always like the story was way more profound than the experience. And that the opposite has been true with my connection to the feminine face of God. The other thing that I think is really important to express when I'm talking about masculine, feminine, and I'm talking about growing up in the Catholic Church. And like I want to touch on it. I definitely think it might be its own full podcast episode, because it is such an important topic and it's one that we don't talk about often. But like I have touched on this many times in many different formats of both social media and in the podcast, and it definitely in my sessions. I've like deep dived into in my sessions and with clients and in programs, especially those of us who are running businesses, who are here called on this path of the feminine revolution, of like elevating these heart-centered, purpose-driven businesses, brands, practitioners, and bringing wealth into them so that we can be resourced and we can affect the world in these beautiful ways. I have talked many times about this, the difference between self sensualization and someone outside of you sexualizing you, and like what it means to grow up in a feminine body. And it was such a difficult point in my life to be getting all of this external rhetoric about a masculine God and feeling like the feminine God was missing, or the feminine was just like not at all present in religion, in this divine connection outside of, yes, we have the Mary, the mother of Jesus. We have these like little snippets that now we can see have been so bastardized around the other Mary, Mary Magdalene in the Bible, and like how the patriarchy and the erasure of the feminine. But growing up, there was such an absence of the feminine, especially in religion. And yet the feminine was so vilified, the feminine body, feminine pleasure, feminine connection, and there was no higher connection with the feminine. And so I am so sad about the fact that the majority, pretty much all, if not all of the women that I have talked to, that I have worked with, that I've connected with, that I have shared stories with, that have shared their stories with me, express that their earliest memory is being sexualized by oftentimes a much older man long before they ever self-sensualized. And so what I mean by this is, before inside your own self, you feel and experience and pursue and explore this sensual connection to yourself, your own body, or your own stimuli, or like how you are feeling, but that you experience someone projecting, someone experiencing sexual energy at you long before that was self-cultivated inside of you. And like all of these different pieces, as I described in the beginning, like we're talking the one root structure of like the erasure of the feminine, the like this clear fact that like the rooster is not included in this conversation. And yet the majority of us have grown up in a world where the masculine God is either the primary God or the only God, and that organized religion is so focused on the masculine face of God. And yet we have so many womb holders, women, young girls growing up absolutely unsupported. And that when we only focus on one side, and we can see this in our world, that like this this has a long-term effect on us, and there is so much problem and difficulty in the world because of this. And so like I'm thinking about all these like different swarming pieces, and I come back to the feminine face of God and the spiritual dehydration of our planet, or reality, through this erasure of the feminine, this demotion of the feminine to a secondary position, or like coming from the man. And it's funny to me how the creation story like states that the woman comes from the man, yet every man that ever walked the earth, including Jesus Christ, including Yeshua, was born of a woman, of a womb, of this specific earthbound portal. And like the only portal strong enough on this planet, on planet Earth, to bring a soul from the ether, from the quantum, from the like space of totality, this like consciousness, and portal it into a human vessel is the womb. And it's funny how the Immaculate Conception is a story of a woman bearing a child without the insemination offering of a man, but it doesn't skip the womb aspect, the gestation aspect, the birthing aspect. And as a woman who has had a wild pregnancy and a fully sovereign free birth and almost like completely on my own and uninterrupted by anyone or anything, I can truly speak to the power of this rite of passage. And as a priestess, this experience of this psychedelic event that is birth, and those of you who might hear that might be very triggered by that. Like, birth is a psychedelic event. Like, we can look at that scientifically. The psychedelic experience that happens within the womb holder on this transition through this rite of passage, like, it is a divine experience, a divine ceremony, a sacred dance, and one that has been like very violently ripped away from women and from other women holding us and teaching us. It's been ripped away from midwives and from doulas and from medicine women, and it has been shoved and forced into a very patriarchal structure, a very, let's be really honest, like a racist structure. I mean, look at the history of obstetrics and like just like take a few minutes to look at that, and like the liability focus, like we are no longer experiencing birth. The majority of women who birth in captivity, for the most part, are not able to experience the support of other women who have gone through this in a natural, holistic, rite of passage ceremony type way, because it has been turned into this medical emergency, this liability focused thing. And like the difference of that experience, like I will definitely do a whole podcast episode, probably many, on that particular topic. But like, as I'm experiencing this chicken, egg, and not the rooster meme, I'm having all of these like downloads come through and connection points come through, and I'm seeing the diminishment and erasure and the miscast of Mary Magdalene and how that was all rewritten, and the rewriting of history to center this masculine authority. And like, what happens to a world when we forget the mother, when we forget the creator, the one who has brought all of us here, and like how erasure has shaped each of our internal worlds. And of course, like, your internal world shapes the exterior world. So like shame and obedience and like so much spiritual self-abandonment. Even like, I think about how I was taught and trained spirituality growing up versus the spirituality that I experienced and how I integrated and how I have embodied when I was finally able to connect in my own way and follow what called to me, what spoke to me, what lit me up, what expanded me, the true experience of alchemy and wisdom versus just knowledge. And like, I've been in this infinity loop where like I am at the center, my current at the center, and like these expressions and downloads and experiences, and then going back into my previous experiences and the foundation and the building of so many of these blocks, these stagnation points, this dis-ease that was built and programmed into my very system, into my body, into my mind, into my energy field. And like, I'm experiencing and reviewing the awakening into the feminine face of God, and this like reclamation through an entirely new lens as a priestess now, who offers this work to others, where I know you've heard me describe, if you've heard any of the other podcast episodes, that my work is a sacred remembrance, that like so much of what I am doing and offering in a session, in a program, is about creating the state for you to remember who and what you really are, to remember your gifts, to remember in general, in all ways, in all shapes, in all forms, that I am not giving you anything that is mine. And like I teach this to my magical mentees and to my apprentices and to those who are moving up through the experience and ranks of their practitioner journey, about not depleting and diminishing your own energy to do this type of work, to offer your energy healing, to offer your work, that like after sessions, I am unbelievably charged up because I'm not diminishing myself to do this work. And so like how separate, how different this relationship is from like my early experience in the church and like what I was told religion or spirituality or connection to that higher power was and was going to be, and how it was described. And like my early adulthood, like breaking away, like I started asking all these questions that I wasn't supposed to ask. I mean, mind you, when I was a kid, I was asking them too. And like everybody was always like very angry with me around like asking these questions in religion and family life at Catholic school. And like the moment that the divine feminine started whispering back, and when I was able to relearn God as mother, as creatrix, as womb, as this true origin point, like what does it feel like in the body when God is not just above you, but is actually within you? And that was such a different piece that, like, yes, even though it was taught in my religion, that in like my religion classes and church and like all of that, that like God is within you. And a lot of the Catholic rhetoric is about taking God into the body through this ritual of like the communion and the body and blood of Christ. But like there was such a difference when I for myself started to really experience and hear the call and feel this relearning, this remembrance, this reawakening of like God is within me and like I am a part of God, and how different that was when it was a feminine mother, a divine in this way God. And like there was a very distinct difference between praying to a masculine God above me, like being told the like proper techniques to ask for forgiveness for my sins, or like speaking my wrongdoings honestly to this like male priest, and like sitting in front of him like as a child myself in my like little school girl uniform and being like, I'm sorry for this, like you literally say, Father, forgive me, and like getting the penance and the verses, like there's truly an indescribable difference between this connection that I was taught and told and described with Sky Daddy, and then the times that I have connected and experienced and unified with the feminine face of God. And so like it's been such an interesting experience to have that all dropped in through almost a meme of like chicken, egg, no rooster, and like that this has never been a part of the conversation, like the feminine as the true likeness of the creator. And like when we talk about the feminine, we talk about cyclical, we talk about intuitive, we talk about life-giving. We must touch on the power of embodiment, of actually like being that in the body, not just knowing that in the mind. We talk about presence, and like so much of what is offered in my sessions is this amount of presence that we do not experience in the majority of other places. I describe my services and I'm often using these like, the who do you help? The like, I see you. I hold you. I support you in a way that you've never experienced before. When we're talking the feminine, we're talking this like inner authority and reconnecting ourselves to this inner authority that we have, this piece of the goddess, of the mother god, the feminine god within us. And like, what happens when women, when womb holders remember and are in a sacred experience of remembrance, are activated, are illuminated, and they remember worship and devotion and magic and experience before the patriarchy existed. So, like, we live in a world that is addicted to productivity, to domination, to certainty. And, like, this is what we lose. Like, when we exile the feminine, we have lost connection. We have lost intuition. We have lost mystery. We have lost this like rhythm, the cyclical nature of the world, of the self. I can't tell you how often in programs with female leaders, with those at the forefront of the feminine revolution, be that in a corporate position or an entrepreneur or a soulpreneur or a practitioner, where they are still trying to operate like a masculine energy on that 24-hour energetic cycle. And I'm like, if this is the only thing that we change, bringing you back into sacred remembrance with your own cycles and honoring yourself as a cyclical being, that will revolutionize your experience in life, in your business, in your connection to yourself. Like, there have been so many wounds created by this devotion to a god who only has one face, and it's a masculine face. And how much of your suffering, of my suffering, of our suffering comes from trying to be someone that we were never meant to be. And so, like, so much of my work and what I'm offering and what I am awakening, or my Gene Keys puts it really beautifully, of a lot of times agitating in people or initiating in people or awakening in people, is this reclaiming of your own spiritual inheritance. The modern priestess path is this going beyond religion into remembrance, into this return to the body, the womb, the cycles, the divine as within you, and you within the divine, and the feminine divine as this like homecoming, this healing, this wholeness. And like, as I am saying this, as I am offering this, have you heard or felt this call? And have you, or how do you connect and devote and worship? We will use this word that is very often triggering to those who hear me as a mouthpiece for a non-organized religion and see a feminine being taking a position of spiritual leadership and guidance and mentorship. And it is yet so different, the path of the priestess and the conversations and the methodology and the style and the flavor of myself and so many of the other priestesses who I connect with is so different and so separate from the way that the masculine teaches and leads and guides, in this very similar, built in the same way of the masculine face of God, of like this overseer and this enforcer and this punisher and this rigidity and structure. And the feminine, when we guide, when we hold, when we teach, when we lead, is so different. And so I am deeply encouraging so many of you who have heard this call, who have felt this call, who are activated and curious and magnetized when you hear conversations like this. in so many ways. Like I invite you to question the stories that you've inherited, that you've been given, and the ones that you've been programmed with. And that is not only limited to those of us who grew up in organized religion. Like, our society in general programs us in so many ways. And like, it is such a blessing for the feminine, the woman, the womb holder, to return to herself. And in returning to the self and focusing on the self, many of us find this deep connection to the feminine face of God in returning to the self. And so much of my work is about inner alchemy, emotional alchemy, abundance alchemy, this like listening to the self, of coming back into, well, what do I know? What do I have buried within me? What sits in my blood and in my bones and in my ancestry? What sits in my akasha? What sits in my heart and my third eye? What is my body telling me? What is my mind, not just my brain, but my mind? What is my intuition? What are my cycles sharing with me? And how am I being communicated with in so many ways all the time? And like, the reminder here is that, like, once again, the conversation has never been about the rooster. Like, we can all see in the lives and the world around us that the true creatrix is the feminine, is the womb, is that portal. And like, this is the truest spiritual connection that I've ever experienced, coming into unity, coming into connection, into devotion to the feminine face of God, the mother God, the goddess. And like, this is the calling of the priestess. This is my calling. And the further I go down this path, the more clarity that I receive on how my calling serves and supports the collective as a feminine portal who is awakening, who is expanding her consciousness consistently, who is called and has truly like chosen the path of the priestess. Like, I am a living portal for sacred remembrance. Like, I see you through the feminine lens, this intuitive sight, this third sight or first sight, our activation of our clairs, our psychic abilities, our engagement, and our discernment in more planes and layers than just the matter-based third dimension. And like, it is a coming back to cycle and to rhythm and to a flow, a refocus, a recentering on the self. Like, you have the answers. You have the magic and the wisdom, and it's all within you. And oftentimes I do play the role of translator for the words, like the 3D matter-based expressions that support you on this sacred inner journey. But like, this is the path of the priestess, offering to the collective that a life and experience and existence of wholeness is not only possible, but that it is calling to you as you call to it. And this wholeness, I have found, is achieved when we are no longer dehydrated and starved of the feminine. And we see this spiritual dehydration in so many areas across our world, because we, as a collective, for the most part, have this understanding that the masculine is the leader, that the masculine is the teacher, that the masculine is God, that the face of God, of the one, is masculine. And there is this erasure of the feminine, and there is this separation from a truth in this. And that the womb portal is the closest to source, to creation. And I deeply believe that when we are told, when we hear we are made in the likeness of the creator, that like, our ability to create is that likeness, our ability to select and choose and create, whether that's for some of us by default or that's conscious creation. And when we truly explore what creation is, the womb holder holds a type of creation that most accurately, most purely connects to source. That, like, a womb is the portal that brings life into this world. And it has confused me from a very young age how God is taught as the creator, and yet it's taught as masculine in so many ways. And yet, when we look back into history, we see that the worship of the feminine, the worship of nature, far predates these masculine gods. And I heard something funny like a long time ago, and it stuck with me so much that, like, man looked at woman and saw that she truly created life. And there was just this wanting of that and feeling separate from that, that, like, man created God because man couldn't create life in the way that the womb creates life, in the way that the womb is the creator, the creatrix, the portal. And yet we have seen this in so many ways out there in the world. And so, as funny as the meme of the rooster is not a part of this conversation at all is, the point that I'm really offering, the point that I'm really illuminating, the aspect of sacred remembrance that I offer to you today in this way is about the feminine face of God and the calling and the connection and this shift in perspective and knowing and belief and understanding that, like, you hold the creation, the power, the portal, you hold the divine within you, and that the way to get close to God, to goddess, to Father, Mother God, Mother, Father, Goddess, the great one, the great spirit, the source, the all, the total, is this inward reflection, is this being able to listen to the way that the divine speaks through you, through your body, the messages that come through your body, the messages that come through your mind, not just your brain, the sensations, the feelings, the intuition that moves through your energy body, and this direct connection that each one of us has the capability, has the capacity, has the, like, antenna, so to speak, to connect with that which you are a part of and that which you carry a part of within you. And that the way of the priestess, the path of the priestess, the purpose of the priestess is to facilitate and to support this connection. But that when you are working with leaders and teachers and mentors and guides and service providers and practitioners, that, like, this baseline that has been missing because we have erased the feminine face of God from so many of our spiritual teachings is this innate understanding inside the self, that it is not within a building, that it is not within another person, another teacher, another leader, that it is truly within the self. And so I offer this to you because that is such an important piece. And so as you are on your journey, as you are on maybe your healing or your awakening or your expansion or your embodiment or your presence, or maybe you are at the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to consciously create the life of my dreams and desires. I'm ready to experience this fullness and this wholeness, that, like, the piece that is missing and the piece that I encourage you to explore and to find the style and the flavor that works for you and that feels alive for you, for so many of us, is the feminine, and is this piece that has been diluted and dismembered and hidden and shoved down. And we each have these little like pull points to different directions and styles and aspects, but that the feminine face of God is awakening in so many ways through so many of us. And it can be a deeply isolating and lonely experience to be called in this way and to be here as a leader and illuminator, someone who's at the forefront, who's taking those steps. Sometimes it feels like before anyone else or in a way that no one else is doing, and yet you are divinely guided and called for that, that there is support here and that this is great work that we are called to do to change the planet, to change the collective that we live in. And for so many of us, the way that we do this is in a deep connection to what has been erased and what has been taken from us. And I know that many of us have lived other lives where we have been chased and we have been persecuted and we have been burned and we have been stoned and we have been killed for our magic and our connection and our understanding. And it has just Tetris in so many ways that the true power, the true magic is the feminine, and that we do really need to reorient so many aspects of this human life to allow for this magic and this flow. And that as science continues to catch up with so much of this magic, and we are so consistently moving beyond the third dimension being the only reality, that if you have felt this call, if you have felt this tingle, this prickle, this desire, this move, if things have been reorienting for you, that I encourage you to follow it, to really continue to seek and to see and to utilize your intuition, to face your intuition, to develop your intuition, and to hold yourself as the divine that you are. And that if you are desiring further connection, if you are called, that there are those of us on the priestess path, on these practitioner paths, who can do more than just teach you something that is outside of you. And to experience this reclamation of self is trajectory changing, is life changing. And I think I will leave you and me and us and all with that. Thank you for being here with me today.